Our scripture reading for today comes from the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Listen now for the word of the Lord. There was once a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down upon it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Skin for skin. All that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and flesh, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, he is in your power. Only spare his life." So Satan went from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job said to her, "You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Job has become an archetype of the long-suffering servant of God, the one who proved faithful through many trials and tribulations. And his story has been passed down and all around within Jewish and Christian and Muslim traditions for centuries. Told and retold, debated by intellectuals and theologians, interpreted by artists, writers, musicians, and who has not even perhaps heard maybe their own grandmother speak of someone who has the patience of Job, maybe referring to herself after a long day of hanging out with you. The story of Job may as well start out once upon a time. This would be perhaps the only way to make it sound more like a myth than it already does, and rightfully so, since that's what it is. This is not a history book, it is a myth, a parable, a story with an agenda. Now, from the get-go, and if you've read Job, you know this story reeks of wanting to teach us something. And because of that, one might enter into the story of Job, maybe prepared for it to feel a little predictable, but also with some high hopes. Now, not high hopes for Job. It's a tough book for him. But rather high hopes for us, that Job's tale of woe might somehow speak some clarity into the question we associate with the story of Job. The question that plagues us, the problem that seems to have no solution. That is, if God is a loving God, why is there suffering in the world? Now let me just cut to the chase here, and if you would like to exit then and get to the donuts early, you can. The book of Job is probably not going to answer that question for you. I feel relatively certain that we will not get answers to that question this side of eternity, if the unanswered questions of millions of humans over thousands of years are any indication. However, Job really does seem to want to teach us something, but I'm afraid we'll have to go in asking a different kind of question. Job has everything that you want in a biblical hero. He is righteous and blameless like Noah. He is God-fearing like Abraham, and he is blessed like Isaac. He's got a big family, 10 kids, that's 7 sons and 3 daughters. Hear all those holy numbers? That must mean something. He's got the kind of livestock that indicates he's running a multifaceted conglomerate of wealth production, textiles, trade, agriculture, all the bases covered. His kids, the text tells us, all love each other so much, and the sons would trade off on hosting the weekend cookouts. And the text tells us that they were such champs that they would even invite the daughters. So nice. After these feast days, it says that Job would make sacrifices on behalf of his kids, just in case there were any unknown, inadvertent sins to be covered that occurred during the feast days. Very thoughtful of Dad there. Job's situation was a regular Norman Rockwell painting. Then, one day, can I take a quick poll of how many people know what I mean when I say Norman Rockwell painting? Yeah, that's okay. Just making sure. Age poll really was what that was. Then one day, it seems that at a heavenly staff meeting, Job comes up as a topic of conversation among the heavenly council that turns up in these kind of mythical stories. And someone named Satan was there, technically the Satan, according to the original language. Now, that word Satan translates a lot of different ways, none of which should really make that image of a red devil with a pitchfork flash through your mind. So just push him aside. Literally, it means the accuser or the adversary. One interesting interpretation frames these different beings in the heavenly council as different aspects of the divine personality. So this adversarial being could just be God playing devil's advocate to God's own self. At any rate, just to make sure we're steering clear of the red devil imagery, we're going to call this being the adversary. Now, Job's suffering unfolds in two very similar chapters, the second of which you heard Sean read today. And in both, God asks the adversary, what has he been up to? And the adversary reports that he's been going to and fro on the earth, walking up and down on it. I'm picturing him as kind of a divine mall cop. And God asks him, how about my guy Job? There is no one like him on the earth. He is blameless and upright and God-fearing and turns away from evil. And in the first chapter, when you didn't hear today, the adversary responds, well, sure, why wouldn't he be like that? Who wouldn't with all those blessings? But take away all that stuff, and he'll change his tune. And so God takes the bet. God lets the adversary go and bring mayhem to Job's life. The oxen, the donkeys, the sheep, the camels, the servants, and even his children. The whole big, happy Norman Rockwell family gone, destroyed. And Job received this barrage of bad news, one disaster piled up on top of another and another and another. And then he got up and he tore his robe and he shaved his head and he fell on the ground and worshipped. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now think about singing that first song that we sang this morning from the seat that Job occupied. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then a second heavenly staff meeting happens. And like a bad joke or a fable, the setup is just the same. Hey, Satan, what have you been up to? Oh, going to and from the earth, etc., etc. How about my guy Job? God says. There's no one like him on earth. He is blameless, upright, and God-fearing, and turns away from evil. And he still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Some scapegoating there from God. We're going to deal with that another day. And the adversary responds, well, sure, because it's just stuff and the lives of others, but not his own life. Make him hurt. Give him real physical pain, and Job will change his tune. And again, God takes the bet. With loathsome sores from head to toe, Job was literally, graphically laid bare. He sat in ashes, still mourning the loss of his livelihood, his children, and now he's in this great pain, silent, still refusing to curse God on account of his suffering. Now, we don't hear from the adversary again. He disappears from the scene. He won't come up again in this book because his purposes are fulfilled here. See, his task, like a good devil's advocate, was to try to make room for doubt. To make room for Job to doubt God, and to make room for God to doubt Job. It's odd to think about the possibility of God having doubt. Doubt comes from not knowing what the future holds, right? Which is likely a problem that God doesn't have, we hope. Doubt is being unsure about something because you cannot see it all. One doubts because there is no guarantee. One doubts because things are not certain. But you can say all those same things about faith. Faith comes from not knowing what the future holds. We have faith when we are unsure about something because we can't see it all, but we choose to trust it anyway. We have faith not because there is certainty, but precisely because there is not. The theologian Paul Tillich would remind us that doubt isn't the opposite of faith. No, in fact, it is an element of it. Doubt is a lack of certainty. But so is faith, right? Just spun around a different way. Doubt says, I don't know if that's true. But faith says, I don't know if that's true, but it just might be. Doubt plus hope equals faith. Now, it may seem here that the adversary is testing Job's faith in God, but I wonder if the real story here is a test of God's faith in Job. The adversary raised the question to God, can you trust Job? Can you put your faith in him? And twice God said, yes, I trust Job. I trust that no matter what, Job will be faithful. God trusted Job. Now, sure, we could say that God took stock of Job's character and his history of righteousness and made a safe wager, but this devil's advocate question presents plenty of room for God to doubt Job. To believe that perhaps Job wasn't really worshiping God because God was good, but merely when God was good. Job wouldn't be the first person tempted to such intentions, and he wouldn't be the last. When the world seems to be a raging dumpster fire, it's hard to trust God. When life doesn't turn out the way that you expected, when things begin to go downhill without explanation and the brakes are nowhere to be found, it can be nearly impossible to trust God. When loss or loneliness or illness or being broke or feeling broken weigh you down, trusting God can feel like a fool's errand. And knowing just how hard that it is to trust God, God trusted Job to hold on to hope. Because through their relationship, God trusted that Job had seen the goodness of God that extends beyond mere circumstances. Through building a relationship of trust, God and Job came to trust each other, believing that there was more to see than one met the eye. This is the nature of covenantal relationships, right? Through sickness and health, for richer and poorer. Real trust transcends circumstances and sees that something more is possible. This doesn't mean that Job doesn't have the right to ask questions, or to lament, or to shake a fist at God, to face his misery head on and demand that God live up to God's promises. As we spend the next month with Job, we will see him do all of that, and then some. But we'll also see Job live into the trust that God has for him. We'll see Job go from this two-dimensional, mythical, archetypal paragon of legalistic virtue to this authentic, honest, mad as hell, broken but hopeful person of faith, who is not immune to the tragedies of life and yet is not destroyed by them. We'll see Job's faith empowered by the faith that God has in him. God knows that there's plenty of room for doubt in this relationship of faith on both sides. And God seems to let terrible things happen, and we don't know why. And we too can also let terrible things happen, or even cause them, or stand by silently while they happen to someone else. But God trusts us to not only hold on to hope, but to peddle it to others. And God asks us to have faith that there is more than we can see and to live as though it were so. God trusts us as caretakers of this earth, as our siblings' keepers, and as stewards of good news when bad news dares to prevail. God trusts us with a call to be kind to one another and to be salt and light in the world. God trusts us to love our enemies and pray for those for whom we do not enjoy praying. God trusts us to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly on the path that has been set before us. And God trusts us to bear God's holy image and holy name, knowing that the love that God has for us will always have room in it for our doubts and our frustrations and our laments and every question that arises from pain and suffering. Because this love for which we desperately long will not fail us in the end. Because God has been faithful to God's people, and God is faithful to us. From the depths of Job's lament, a few chapters beyond where we are today, Job cries out these words. Oh, that my words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and with lead they were engraved on a rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side. Thanks be to the God who is on our side.